For the most part, American politics exists in its own bubble with its own preoccupations. But every now and then something that happens in a foreign country intrudes and pokes its nose in. Big time. The 12th of December 2019 UK general election might be such a moment for the US Democratic Party, just as British politics imposed itself on the US presidential election on the 23rd of June 2016, when the British people voted for Brexit. Coincidentally, Donald Trump arrived in Scotland the following day, not the day before as he has repeatedly claimed, and what the British people had just done was a galvanizing moment in his campaign, a light bulb moment, as he prepared to face the American people 5 months later. So what should Democrats learn from the misery that befell the Labour Party last Thursday night? And more particularly, can they afford to have Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren as their candidate and stand a chance of defeating Donald Trump in 2020 after the shellacking meted out to Jeremy Corbyn and his brand of radical, left-wing policies? Let me start in Sedgefield in County Durham, an old mining constituency, whose pits closed in the 1970s and 1980s. It is a largely white, working-class area. It has been rock-solid labor since the dinosaurs roamed the earth. It is not unlike any number of towns you could find in the Appalachians in Pennsylvania. I've spent a bit of time there from when I was writing a long-forgotten biography of Tony Blair in the mid-1990s through to when he became Prime Minister. In the village of Trimden is the Labour Club. The last time I was there, Tony Blair was pulling the winning numbers out in the raffle, main prize a turkey, plucked, second prize a pound of sausages. The people I met there were decent, hardworking, straight-talking, and small-c conservative. They had chosen Tony Blair as their candidate for the 1983 election because he wasn't on the loony left wing of the party, as his election agent explained to me over a pint in the Dun Cow Inn in the constituency. I reported from the nearby Leisure Centre in 2005 when Tony Blair won the seat for Labour with a huge majority, and won his third successive general election. The people of Sedgefield had delivered him a majority of over 18,000 and 58% of the vote. No one else came close. But last Thursday night, incredibly, unbelievably, ground-shakingly, Sedgefield went conservative. Sedgefield. Conservative. It is mind-boggling. Remember, when Blair won with that gargantuan majority in 2005, he was at the height of his unpopularity, or the nadir of his likability, whichever way you want to put it. The controversial Iraq War had been 2 years earlier, and there was a strong feeling that Britain had gone to war on a false prospectus. No weapons of mass destruction had been found, and, hugely uncomfortably for Blair, the father of a British soldier who had died in conflict there, stood against the Prime Minister as an anti-war candidate. Blair, by now, was no longer seen as the great hope, but as smarmy President George W. Bush's poodle, in the pocket of big business, and a war criminal. It was ugly. And yet he romped home on his third way, left-of-center, progressive ticket. And he was returned as Prime Minister with a comfortable majority, a third successive election victory, a feat that no other Labour politician in history had achieved. Seismic change, but the policies of Labour in the 2019 election are very different from what they were in 2005 when Tony Blair and the so-called modernisers held sway. Labour last Thursday went into the election with an unashamedly socialist set of policies promising a massive increase in government spending, and big tax increases for the well-off. Nationalisation of some industries was back on the agenda. There would be massive increase in spending for the National Health Service, and an offer of free broadband for everyone. Why no offer of free puppies for all? One wag asked derisively. The problem is that the pragmatic, working-class people of Sedgefield, and any number of other constituencies across the industrial towns and cities of the UK, held their collective noses and said, "You must be joking." These are smart, savvy people. They know that you don't get something for nothing. Electoral districts that all my life have been Labour, Blyth Valley, Bolsover, Rother Valley, Newcastle-under-Lyme, Dudley, Grimsby, are now held by the Conservatives. It is hard to overstate just how seismic this is. And remember, social class in the UK has always been a bigger determinant of how people vote than it has been in the US. Just like the whole class system, frankly. Some of these constituencies have never, ever flirted with the right. Of course, there is a massive caveat that makes reading across from what happened in the UK to what might happen in the US precarious. Brexit, no deal, the European Union withdrawal agreement will not be on the ballot in the 2020 US presidential election. Brexit did play a big part in this general election, how could it not given the turmoil in Britain of these past 3.5 years? but is Phil Wilson, the man who succeeded Tony Blair as the Labour MP in Sedgefield, and who lost his seat on Thursday night, pointed out Brexit was nothing like as big an issue on the doorstep as Jeremy Corbyn and Labour's socialist policies. Kitchen table issues. Democrats would be wise to dig deeper into the reasons for such wholesale rejection of the UK Labour Party. If you are plotting a path to victory in 2020 that takes you through Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin, the three states that the Democrats lost in 2016 by a teeny-weeny number of votes and that guaranteed Donald Trump victory, then there are many similarities between these states and the industrial heartlands that Labor have just lost. Michigan's Democrats swept the board in the midterms in 2018, and the newly elected governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is admirably straightforward about why they were able to turn around the fortunes of the Democratic Party after the shock of 2016. They didn't promise the earth, they promised to fix the roads. Kitchen table issues. But among the radical, socialist, progressive, liberal, choose your epithet wing of the Democratic Party there is an ambition, a hunger for earth-shaking pledges. The bold Green New Deal, Medicare for all, which to those of us who are European may not seem such a giant leap, these are big-ticket policy ambitions with even greater price tags attached. But will they fly in a country where the center of political gravity is much further to the right than it is in the UK? Promising bigger government and higher taxes may not be impossible. But it's not going to be an easy sell. I saw two sets of statistics that really struck me. In last Thursday's election, it seems 58% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted Labour. Only 16% of those over 60, it's estimated, voted Labour. Similarly, the percentage of Democrats under 30 and qualified to vote in the primaries who are backing either Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren is massive. Something like 70%. Everyone else in the field is and also ran. But look at any statistics on election turnout, and you will see it is those infuriating oldies who vote in the highest numbers. Grasshoppers and cows, and to Democrats in the US who look at their Twitter feeds and see the likes and retweets mounting up as they advance this or that position, let the 2019 UK election be a warning to you. For some Labour activists, the result of the election seems to have come as a massive shock, because in the echo chamber world that we all now to a greater or lesser extent live in, you come away with the impression that everyone thinks like you. Twitter is not the real world. Nowhere near. In the 1980s and 1990s, when protesters would take to the streets of London over the poll tax or the sighting of American cruise missiles at Greenham Common, or more recently the Iraq War, and most recently the huge protest marches backing Remain, the participants would often claim that because so many people had come out onto the streets, this was the view of the British people. But for the million who may have protested, still a huge number, there were 59 million who had stayed at home. American Democrats need to be mindful of this. People like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez may be a social media genius, and she is, and she may have a massive number of followers, and she has, and be charismatic, and she has that by the bucketload, but America is a big country with an awful lot of voters who are not signed up to all the woke things she and others might be advocating. The best voice on this is from a pre-tweeting, pre-electronic media, pre-opinion poll age, and it is from the 18th century Anglo-Irish philosopher, Edmund Burke. He wrote, because half a dozen grasshoppers under a fern make the field ring with their importunate chink, whilst thousands of great cattle, reposed beneath the shadow of the British oak, chew the cud and are silent, pray do not imagine that those who make the noise are the only inhabitants of the field. Labour in the UK lost the working class, but gained the woke. And that will give the party sleepless nights over the coming months and years. It was their worst defeat since 1935. I watched the UK election on Thursday night from the British Embassy in Washington, where the toast of Washington society met and mingled as the results came through. A smart friend of mine had to leave early to go to another event. She contacted me the next day to say that she went to a dinner and was seated next to a Democrat senator. As she sat down, he leaned over to her and said, "Are you following what's going on in Britain? Labour getting clobbered. We Dems in the US had better pay close attention." A minute's silence has been observed in New Zealand, marking 1 week since the deadly eruption of White Island volcano. The tribute was held at 14:11 local time, 1:11 Greenwich Mean Time, the exact moment of the eruption. 16 deaths have been confirmed while 2 bodies are still missing, believed to be in the water off the island. About 20 people remain in intensive care with severe burns. Relatives of some of the victims observed the silence on a police boat near the island, local media reported. On social media, some New Zealanders said drivers pulled their cars over to pay their respects. On Sunday, teams returned to White Island, also known by its Maori name of Wakari, and divers searched the water but, again, were unable to locate the missing bodies. This is a difficult and ongoing task, Deputy Commissioner John Timms said in a statement, adding that police remained committed to retrieving the bodies. What we know of the victims. Volcano tourism in the spotlight. Why skin is being imported. On Instagram, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern paid tribute to many people who did extraordinary things to save lives, saying, "Those who have been lost are now forever linked to New Zealand, and we will hold them close." Ms. Ardern, who visited some of the first responders last week, marked the minute's silence during her cabinet's weekly meeting. What about the identification of the victims? The identification process is being carried out in Auckland by experts including a pathologist, a forensic dentist and a fingerprint officer. The first victim officially named was Christalie Browett, a 21-year-old Australian from Melbourne who was visiting the island with her family. Other victims named by police so far are Tiffany Manji, 24, from New Zealand; Zoe Ella Hosking, 15, from Australia; Gavin Brian Dallow, 53, from Australia; Anthony James Langford, 51, from Australia; Matthew Robert Hollander, 13, a U.S. citizen and Australian permanent resident; Berend Lawrence Hollander, 16, a U.S. citizen and Australian permanent resident; Martin Berend Hollander, 48, from Australia; Carla Michelle Matthews, 32, from Australia; Jessica Richards, 20, from Australia; Jason David Griffiths, 33, from Australia; Christine Elizabeth Langford, 45. From Australia. Police are gathering information about possible victims, such as descriptions of appearance, clothing, photos, fingerprints, medical and dental records and DNA samples. These details will then be matched to the evidence gathered in the post-mortem examination. Out of the 47 people on the island when the eruption happened, 24 were from Australia, 9 from the US, 5 from New Zealand, 4 from Germany, 2 from China, 2 from the UK, and 1 from Malaysia. Prime Minister Boris Johnson will address his new intake of Conservative MPs later as they arrive in Westminster to take their seats in Parliament. Many of the 109 new MPs won in areas traditionally held by Labour in Thursday's election, which saw the Conservatives gain an 80-seat majority. Their first job will be to vote on the withdrawal agreement bill that the PM intends to bring back before Christmas. Mr. Johnson is also expected to carry out a mini cabinet reshuffle. He needs to fill posts made vacant by those who stood down ahead of the general election, including the Culture and Welsh Secretary posts. The Queen will formally open Parliament on Thursday when she sets out the government's legislative programme. It is thought the withdrawal agreement bill, WAB, on leaving the EU could be put before MPs as early as Friday. Ahead of the private speech, a Number 10 source said, "The PM has been very clear that we have a responsibility to deliver a better future for our country and that we must repay the public's trust by getting Brexit done. That's why the first piece of legislation new MPs will vote on will be the withdrawal agreement bill." With the large majority, the bill is expected to pass through Parliament in time to meet Boris Johnson's promise for the UK to leave the EU on the 31st of January. Mr. Johnson then has to negotiate a new trade agreement with the EU and have it ratified before the end of the post-Brexit transition period that ends on the 31st of December 2020. He has repeatedly said that the transition period will not be extended. The Queen's speech is also expected to include legislation linked to pledges made during the election campaign, most notably a guarantee on NHS funding. Moves to get the Northern Ireland government at Stormont up and running again are also expected, with talks resuming before Christmas. Scroll and see the results that sealed it. All you need to know: the night's key points, maps and charts, the election in graphics, Brexit, what happens now. WHO won in my constituency. Check your result. Meanwhile, the fallout from Labour's defeat continues. Labour's General Secretary says party officials are likely to meet early in the new year to agree the timetable for replacing Jeremy Corbyn as leader. Mr. Corbyn wants the process to begin swiftly, Jenny Formby said, so his successor can be in place by the end of March. She has written to members of Labour's National Executive Committee, NEC, recommending a provisional date of the 6th of January for the meeting, with the process beginning the following day. Both Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell said on Sunday that they took the blame for Labour's catastrophic defeat in Thursday's election. Mr. Corbyn said he was sorry that we came up short, while Mr. McDonnell told the BBC he owns this disaster. The race for their replacements has already begun, with Wigan MP Lisa Nandy saying for the first time she was seriously thinking about running. Other possible contenders are Shadow Brexit Secretary Sir Keir Starmer, Shadow Business Secretary Rebecca Long-Bailey, Shadow Education Secretary Angela Rayner, Jess Phillips, who is an outspoken critic of Jeremy Corbyn, and Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry. A new intake of 48 SNP MPs will also be taking their seats on Tuesday. Leader Nicola Sturgeon has insisted this number gives her a mandate for a second referendum on Scottish independence, something the Prime Minister has told her he remains opposed to. She said the Conservatives, who lost 7 of their 13 seats in Scotland, had been defeated comprehensively, and that the new MPs would continue to press for independence. What will happen this week? Tuesday. Proceedings begin when MPs gather for their first duty, to elect the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who replaced John Bercow in November. Technically, MPs can hold a vote on this motion, but this has never happened in practice. Later in the day, the Speaker will begin the process of swearing in MPs, who are required to take an oath of allegiance to the Crown, or, if they object to this, a solemn affirmation. Those who speak or vote without having done so are deprived of their seat, as if they were dead, under the Parliamentary Oaths Act of 1866. 2 to 3 days are usually set aside for this process. Thursday. The state opening of Parliament. The Queen's speech is the centerpiece of this, when she will read a speech written by ministers setting out the government's program of legislation for the parliamentary session. A couple of hours after the speech is delivered, MPs will begin debating its contents, a process which usually takes days. Friday. Depending on how rapidly Boris Johnson wants to move, the debate on the Queen's speech could continue into Friday. This may be interrupted for a second reading debate on the withdrawal agreement bill. MPs in the previous Parliament backed Boris Johnson's bill at its first stage but rejected his plan to fast-track the legislation through Parliament in 3 days in order to leave the EU by the 31st of October Brexit deadline. After the debate on the Queen's speech is concluded, MPs will vote on whether to approve it. Not since 1924 has a government's Queen's speech been defeated. YouTube star PewDiePie has announced he is taking a break from the platform, saying he is feeling very tired. The 29-year-old Swedish star, real name Felix Kjellberg, found fame with video game commentaries and was at one point the world's highest-earning YouTuber. But he was more recently involved in controversies around accusations of racism and anti-Semitism. Early next year I'll be away for a little while. I'll explain that later, PewDiePie said in a video post. Earlier this year, PewDiePie, who currently has 102 million subscribers, was overtaken as the biggest YouTube channel in the world by Bollywood record label T-Series, which now has more than 121 million subscribers. I am taking a break from YouTube next year. I wanted to say it in advance because I made up my mind. I'm tired. I'm feeling very tired. I don't know if you can tell, PewDiePie said, laughing. Disney cut ties with him in 2017 after some videos he released were found to contain Nazi references or anti-Semitic imagery. He accepted the material was offensive but said he did not support any kind of hateful attitudes. PewDiePie had been linked to Disney through Maker Studios, a company with a network of YouTube stars. Later that year, he apologized for using the N-word during a live stream. And last year, he apologized again for reposting a meme which appeared to mock Demi Lovato's hospital treatment for a suspected drug overdose.